At this time, I'd like to call this meeting of the Board of Estimate and Apportionment to order. It is February 13th, 3:08. And if there's no other business, I'd like to make a motion to introduce the mayor's proposed annual estimate for fiscal year 2025. If someone would like to second that, I will begin the presentation.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, good afternoon. Thank you all for coming, and anyone who is listening online, thank you for tuning in. This is the mayor's proposed annual estimate for fiscal year 2025. I'm Mayor Mike Galimi. Hello. The agenda will be a discussion on the budget preparation, discussion on the financial position of the city of Utica, an analysis of the actual fiscal year 25 annual estimate proposal, and then administrative actions as we move forward that myself, the chief of staff, the administration, and hopefully the council will be working with me on as we move into the future. So the fiscal year 25 annual estimate. Before we could start, we did have to complete the fiscal year 23 financial audit and close munis for fiscal year 23. That was the year ending March 31st, 2023. Why this impacted the preparation of fiscal year 25. Not only were we not certain of the actual financial position of the city, the last known financial state audited form was the 2021-2022 year. Also, we are more actively using munis in the preparation. You'll see that the budgets that were presented are actually printed out of our accounting system moving forward. So we did have to close the book so we could open the preparation of fiscal year 25 in the system. A bit of a news flash. There's been a lot of confusion in the press, amongst the people, staff, many actually, that we're sitting, as of the state of the city last year, on a $14.1 million fund balance. Unfortunately, that was the fund balance at the end of fiscal year 2021-22. That's the fiscal year that ended March 31st, 2022. At that time, once we figured out the actual position of the city, we estimated the position of the current fiscal year 23-24 so that we could responsibly plan the budget for fiscal year 25. So steps taken, just to walk people through what we had to do to come up with this budget proposal. Again, aforementioned, assess current financial position of the city. We had to review the healthcare self-insurance policy and obtain a fiscal year 25 guidance to see if there were substantial increases. And as you'll see, as we move on to the proposal, there weren't substantial increases similar to prior years, but there was an incremental increase. We had to review the departmental estimates throughout the month. That started day one when the administration took office. We immediately scheduled the meetings with each department and went over their estimates for fiscal year 25 and started working on getting those into a spreadsheet. We had to close fiscal year 23. That was also mentioned on the prior slide. One of the reasons you really want to close the year is so you know where you end up. If you want to plan the next year, you truly need to know not only the fiscal health, but where you stand with cash and asset positions. Prepare the general expenditures, assess any legislative and executive actions that could affect revenue. This is something that we did discuss. We passed legislation down to the council, for example, to adjust our residential occupancy inspections. They have been unadjusted for many years, and the revenue we bring in to perform those inspections does not come close to cover the actual inspection cost, so those fees had to be adjusted, for example. Another thing, which is through the administration, is the adjustment of our ambulance service costs. Now, we will adjust the rates of our ambulance service, but as they're billed through insurance, even if you doubled an ambulance service, you're only going to bring in a certain amount because you're going to get paid based on insurance. So we can expect possibly to increase those revenues by maybe 10% year over year outside of the call volume that's been increasing. Those are a couple examples. At that point, we prepare the general revenues. Once you know your expenses, that's when you can really get down to the brass tacks of what you need to do to assess the revenue streams and ensure that the city can responsibly pay for its services. At that point, we finalize the mayor's estimate, and we sit here today. Something to note, the file that printed the budgets today will be emailed to the Board of E&A. It's also, as I stated at last week's meeting, it's searchable. So it's an actual PDF. You can use Control F if you want to see what the lease payments are. If you want to find, DPW administration, you can actually search the document. The table of organization is also included, but separate in the back of the budget booklet. So, some discussion on the financial position of the city as it stood at the end of March 2023. Now, typically, this would be completed and presented in the November-December timeframe if we did perform an audit, close the books. For whatever reason, that was not done, so thanks to the Controller's Office and all involved, we did perform the audit in January, close the books, and figure out where we were. We did have a couple key findings. We did have a lack of capital project control. That's something we're going to be working on moving forward. And fiscal year 22-23 was overspent by $2.35 million. The change in fund balance was a deficit. The change in fund balance was $1.3 million in the red. So the end of year fund balance ended up, as of March 31st, 2023, $12.8 million total. As you can see, in preparing to move on to fiscal year 25, I've performed some analysis on the surplus deficit control we've had over the years. I'll also get to the actual fund balance itself. But what you see is that peak there, the $3 million surplus, that was at the end of March 31st, 2022. That is the peak. That was the $14.1 million fund balance. You see a year later, we had a deficit of $1.3 million. That's March 31st. And based on the current estimates in the fourth quarter of the current fiscal year, 2024, we're estimating that this year may end in almost a $1.9 million deficit. So what does this mean for our fund balance? As you can see from 2012 all through 2022, our fund balance did grow at a very good rate, and it allowed us to obtain a great bond rating. It allowed the state controller to rate us with a very high fiscal score, which was very good for the city. Unfortunately, due to certain economic situations and indicators that I will outline, you see the fund balance peaked 22, 14.1 million. But at this point, something else to note is we didn't have restricted fund balance for quite some time. You see in 2020, there's that little orange blip of $500,000. That was our first restricted reserve fund. We established that so that we could better insulate the city from a lot of retirements. That was $500,000 that year where we implemented a restricted reserve so that if we did have a swath of retirements and we had vacation payouts or incentives or anything to deal with actually people transitioning into retirement, we'd be able to insulate the actual city budget year over year from that. From that point on, we established flood reserves, other capital reserves, and you see that now where we sit, estimated moving into fiscal year 25, we're going to have $7.7 million of unrestricted funds. So that's down quite a bit from the 11 million that we had just about 2.5 years ago, and that needs to be considered in the preparation of this budget. So just a summary, fiscal year 21, 22, 14.1 million. Fiscal year 22, 23, 12.8 million. Fiscal year 23, 24, an estimated fund balance of 10.9 million, with 7.7 million unrestricted, Unfortunately, what that means is we do have to take action because our year-over-year strength as far as our fiscal policy and our health is diminishing. So over the years, there's things we haven't taken account of. We haven't taken account appropriately over the last, especially the last 6 years, contractual costs in our budgeting, inflation, infrastructure costs, repairs, lost or unadjusted revenue. Without any action now, what we're kind of walking off of is a fiscal cliff. That's why those charts looked like they did. And if we don't act and use prudence, we will start to negatively impact public safety, public works, and our ability to actually maintain our infrastructure within the city. Now, I was on the board of E&A for many years, so I do want to comment that, for example, last year we cited a lot of different things. I voted no on that budget. In prior years, I'll cite Councilman Williamson, myself, even the controller, and many times we've discussed the fact that during high rates of inflation, when our contractual costs were well above COLA, we shouldn't have been doing zeros. We basically walked ahead maintaining a fixed levy when we knew that our budgets were going to be growing. So the fiscal year 25 annual estimate. The general city fund, expenditures around 17 million. Public safety, 56 million. DPW, just under 6 million. And our debt service, around 8 million. That's a total of $87 million. Okay, that's substantial. Very substantial. Why? Because if you look at our budget from 2018 through 2024, it's grown. Okay, we started in the 2017-18 year, we had an adopted budget of $69 million. Okay, as you walk through, it was kind of flat. You see that, right? 72, a couple years later, 22, 23, we've got 74 million. Okay, now 23, 24, we adopted a budget last year of $80 million. If you actually go into our accounting system right now, the budget actual right now, as I stand here, is 84.5 million. Okay, so sorry, boss. You're fine. The proposed budget this year is $7 million for the year-over-year increase, totaling 87 million. Now, what makes that up? Okay, with a $7 million increase, you would expect that we've hired people, increased departments, added services. Really what I've walked into here as a new administration is figuring out how to stabilize the financial position of the city while holding the line on what we're providing as services and managing them better. The state retirement, our estimate that we have to put into our budget this year, the year-over-year increase is $1.89 million. Our healthcare costs, while this was actually only a 10% increase, which compared to last year is actually pretty good, it is $1 million. Year-over-year increase on our contractual raises, our contract settlements, contracted services, our debt service. Okay, Bureau of Fire. Now these were deserved raises, but 4 years of compound raises ended up in a year-over-year increase on the fire line salaries of $1.67 million. That's a year-over-year increase over last year's budget. The Bureau of Police, CSEA, Teamsters, and Contracted Services are all around a 3% increase for a year-over-year of an additional $1.26 million. Debt service, everyone remembers last year we did a large substantial bond for a lot of capital improvements, and we also had bonds that we had to pass to complete ARPA projects and additional paving. Debt service, year-over-year, another $1.2 million. So this increase truly is coming from absolute uncontrollable factors that we have to deal with. So fiscal year 25 annual estimate, I do want to talk about last year's budget. Because why would you have an $80 million budget when you know a lot of these costs were coming, a lot of things should have been budgeted for, which makes it look like, hey, we're just hitting the road here, and a year later it's up 7 million. That's not the case. We did not account for a contract settlement. a large contract settlement. Now again, the people who actually protect and serve us in the Bureau of Fire absolutely deserve the raises they received, but that contract settlement wasn't accounted for in a budget. So now it's hitting this budget to the tune of $1.67 million, but it also, halfway through the fiscal year, hit last year's budget, which is why we're projecting part of the deficit that we're projecting. We utilized the SAFER grant in full to balance the budget. If you go into last year's budget, you'll see a $2.1 million draw into our revenues from the SAFER grant. What you'll go and see in this year's budget is something to the tune of $700,000, the appropriate amount to bring into the actual budget year. Now, this has been since corrected, but it's left a large revenue gap in the current year again. That's going to hopefully not have a huge impact, but unfortunately it's going to play into the fact that we may have a large deficit in this year, the budget that was passed April 1st last year. In last year's budget, we utilized over $2 million in CIT funds. Now, every time we do that, those accounts do build interest, and they can be built back up. But every time we take money from CIT, the next following year, you can only consume half of it. The trust was built like that for a reason, so that the funds would not be completely deprecated. But we did use $2 million to do that. So the reality is fiscal year 23-24, and I did cite this publicly last year as council president, could have been a 15% tax increase. It could have been. Now that budget is also projected to end in a deficit this March. Okay, so the prior year's budget was completely underfunded at $80 million, but balanced on paper. So the fiscal year 25 annual estimate, every year we have major funding sources. We have property tax, which was unadjusted for 6 years, zero account for inflation. We have sales tax. Now, sales tax has been our savior, kind of. And this is in part where I think over the last couple of years, things have gone sideways. Everyone expected sales tax to keep exponentially growing, okay, but it's not, okay? It is ready for a plateau. We're projecting a 5% growth year over year moving into fiscal year 25, but we do believe that's going to taper off now that inflation is slowing, okay, and the economy is also kind of stabilizing where it was at a high inflationary rate coming out of COVID for quite some time. State AIM funding, okay? This is our sales tax and our income tax that goes to Albany and comes back to us as a municipality. That's been unadjusted by the state. It's fixed for 18 years, and that, unfortunately, is at zero account for inflation, economic growth, or changes in census data and population. Now, I do have to say this is something that I came in advocating for. Myself and the Chief of Staff have already spoken specifically with the Department of State, the Governor's Office. I've spoken specifically with the Governor, and we represented the city for the first time in 12 years at the New York Conference of Mayors, standing with the mayors of New York State, advocating for this funding to be increased because it's absolutely one of the biggest reasons our municipality is actually struggling. So, tax levy analysis. I talked about a lack of account for inflation. Okay, what you see on this slide is our levy in blue. It's flat. There's 6 bars there. That's 6 years of a flat levy. And what's interesting, you see this right here? Last year's 0% tax increase lowered the levy. Okay, the 0% last year actually brought in less revenue, put us in an actual position of losing revenue into the actual budget. Again, one of those reasons why all of a sudden we have this giant increase, okay? Now, you talk about increase for inflation. Now, obviously, you're not going to tie our levy or our taxes to inflation because that would be crazy. You want to properly manage the funds. But just as an example, I took the levy in, 2018, 2019. Starting from that levy, I took the indexed actual inflation rate each year and ran the levy using the inflation rate. Our inflation adjusted levy would have been almost $37 million in this proposed budget coming up. That's not what we're setting it at, okay? So what I'm getting at here is not only did we not bother taking into account any type of inflation, any type of CPI, any type of COLA, we're that far behind the curve. So just as a sales tax analysis, because I did mention the sales tax, it's grown considerably. We used to bring in about 10 million a year. The economic development that we've done, the state investments, the county investments, the work we've done, and inflation have all taken part in growing our sales tax revenue. That is a wonderful thing that we have this large sales tax revenue, but it absolutely is plateauing, and that's not just my estimate. These are economic indicators across the board. So, moving into this year's budget proposal, there's three scenarios. I'm going to go through each. I'm going to discuss exactly which one I took in preparing this, and then we're going to have a discussion with E&A and most likely, lay the budget on the table for passage next week after some potential modifications. So, funding year-over-year increase, scenario one. We could hold the line, utilize reserves, prematurely use bond proceeds to pay for themselves, and cut towards further dysfunction. Now, obviously, I'm not going to do this, but this is what we've been doing. 0%, negative tax increase, 0%, a 0% that gives us less levy. This is how we've been managing our finances, even though we could see blatantly everything going up around us. And if you think about the city like a household, the only thing we don't need to buy is groceries. Every single thing this city does has gone up and indexed to the insane inflation we've seen after COVID. So, if we took this, shrinking reserves and deficits starting in 22-23 fiscal year are a clear indication that our fiscal policy was wrong. If we continue balancing the budget using this scenario, we're going to bankrupt the city. Our reserves, our unrestricted reserves, are already down to just over $7 million. It's fiscally irresponsible, and future tax increases will just quietly compound in the background like they have been for the past 6 to 8 years. Scenario two, again, I'm not doing this. We could purely raise taxes to cover the budget shortage. That would be an increase of 24%. Now, a tax increase this high would be completely unfair to the taxpayer, regardless of how long a zero was held, and utilizing only a tax increase does something else, okay? By not appropriating fund balance in a situation like this and only using a tax increase, you would then create a situation where you can't actually work with the budget director, the controller's office, the council, the board of E&A to manage your finances throughout the year and end up drawing less fund balance. A 24% tax increase would be arbitrary and irresponsible. Scenario three, fairly balance a tax increase with reserve use, taking into account a weakening financial position, which I just outlined, and contractual and economic conditions. What would this do? This will slow fund balance decline, not stop it, but slow it, staving off a bond rating issue and cash position issues. This would also simultaneously allow the city to continue to support the population and the economic activity while leveling future tax increases and managing our year-over-year expenditures. So my proposal is scenario three. Now, I don't want to say this out loud, but this proposal does come with a 16.5% tax increase. It's significantly less than the inflation adjustment analysis results. It's understandably frustrating. Okay, balanced with that tax increase is $3.2 million of fund balance, CIT, and other reserves. So I'm putting this proposal forth with absolute tact because that's still an insane amount of reserves to balance a budget with. But if we're going to maintain the fiscal health of the city while reducing an insane hike like 24%, we have to use those reserves. Now, within this proposal, we hold public safety and public works stable. Funding our city services are essential to the health and being of our municipality. Without major changes and additions to labor, we're utilizing new management and restructuring to deliver better services. I said I was going to start there when I campaigned, and that's where I'm starting. I wanted to stand here raising taxes to pay for our paving out of the general revenues. But instead, I'm standing here trying to fix a lack of account for reality. So, what does this mean to the actual residential property owners? The dollar cost to the residential property owners. The proposed tax rate increase is $4.46 per thousand of assessed value. The average residential increase at $55,000 assessment will be $245 for the year, or $20.40 a month. I don't want to raise taxes at all, but we're in a position where we have to put this proposal forth. My personal increase, just so people see it out there, my taxes, personally, my city taxes will be going up $504 for the year. So before we discuss the proposal with the board, I want to state that this administration is committed to sound fiscal policy. I've just outlined the fact that we've balanced the use of tax levy, reserves, and debt to strengthen the long-term cash and fiscal position of our municipality. Over the next 4 years, I am reestablishing responsible management principles. This means prudent control of capital assets. Case in point, I want to talk about Kennedy Garage right now. What I was greeted with on January 2nd is the fact that we're selling Kennedy Garage to MVHS for $1.5 million. I said, okay. Last year, when I was transitioning, I said, what's the plan? They said, oh, don't worry about it. We just have to move signal maintenance. We have to move facilities maintenance. We have to figure out where to park 100 cars. So we sold this garage for $1.5 million, had those issues. I said, what's the plan? They said, don't worry, we'll just build new facilities and park the cars elsewhere. So here's now what we're dealing with. We're selling Kennedy Garage for $1.5 million. We're going to lose that revenue. We're going to lose the parking spaces to the people we rent to on the third floor. I now have estimates of the facilities we either need to buy or build to move signal maintenance and facilities. And lo and behold, we have to move our generator. So to sell that garage for $1.5 million, now granted, we would have to maintain the garage. It's going to cost us about $6 million. Over and over and over again, we sell our assets for short-term gains so we can realize some revenue and stick it into a budget, and we end up going completely backwards. I'm having to deal with that now, and I'm standing here just working with the hand we're dealt, okay? We have to stop this practice. That's a revenue stream we're also walking away from. Now, something a little more positive. Maintaining revenue streams that benefit the city as a whole. The parking authority. We've got garages all over the place. We bonded for parking meters like 17 times already. You know, we've got all this we could do. So day one, we said, what are we doing here? We have a new hospital downtown. We have property owners and business owners asking for parking meters around the county building because they want to stop the situation of people jockeying their cars and having a situation where they don't have parking for people to actually come and eat at their restaurants. So we've already taken action on that. We bonded for it last year. We now have the engineering department actually putting forth the plans and deciding how to put the proper metering in our parking lots. After that, we're going to decide how to move forward with the parking meters. We're going to responsibly control parking while creating a revenue stream for the city. We now have a new hospital downtown. We looked at the 90-minute parking. We never even bothered to expand our 90-minute parking to go around the new hospital. So there's a lot of things we just don't do that we should be doing as a municipality. So advocacy and action, this is the last thing I want to talk about before we move on. As I stated, we went to the New York Conference of Mayors. We've spoken with the Department of the State. We've talked to our state and federal representation. We haven't just spoken to them. All of these types of analytics that I've put in this actual budget proposal, from day one we've been talking to them about. And we've been present. We've been in Albany. We've been in their offices. We're asking them here. On day one, the county executive met with us in this building so that we could resolve a situation where we had no purchasing department and no ability to even buy a pen in this building. And now we've passed down legislation to the council, and there's legislation introduced at the county so we can implement a shared services agreement for our purchasing department. In the governor's office, in the last month and couple weeks, we have not only spoken to, but met with the governor personally to actually address not only our youth violence issue, our AIM funding issues, our infrastructure issues, and how we want to move this city forward and continue the economic growth and fiscal stability that we've come to know. So with that, I'd like to thank every single person who helped in preparing this budget. As you know, we've interviewed many budget directors, but we will be bringing one in on March. So we have many people in this audience from our controller's office who have assisted the administration, and I'd like to thank every single person who lives in this city, because every single one of you is appreciated. And this address, which does include a tax increase, was difficult to deliver, but I know that this is what we have to do to move the city forward. Thank you. All right, thank you. Excellent. All right, so this is introduced. We obviously don't have to vote on it now. But what I do want to mention is there's one thing we were working on prior to the final proposal going together, and that's our appropriation of capital. We did bond for Kennedy Garage repairs, okay? Those repairs were bonded for to the tune of $2 million. There was question whether or not we could use those monies to pay our debt, okay, our yearly debt service. It looks like, and we need full confirmation on this, and I think we have it from bond counsel at this point, that we could use those funds to make more than our typical payment against the entire bond. Okay, so not just specifically because it was one package. Now, that doesn't come with just a freebie, right? If we do that this year, we still have to service that debt next year. And with the situation of Kennedy Garage, we may have to use that debt service to truly pay itself off, because we may actually have to borrow to build new facilities. So I've appropriated a small amount of that fund balance to offset to the tune of $250 in my proposal. But it's possible that if using more of that would offset the known debt service for next year, maybe that's something we should consider possibly amending, but I wanted to bring that to the board for your thought. Okay? Any questions?
$250?
$250,000. Yeah.
I was gonna say 250 is not gonna do it.
Yeah, 250,000, sorry.
No problem.
All right. I actually need my water here. That's part of the issue. No, but does the board have any questions? Because we do have no other business. What we would like to do, we have to pass this budget by February 20th to the Common Council. So we will have to have a meeting next week, which we don't have to set now, but it is due by the 20th. So do you have any questions at this time?
No.
Okay,
I'm prepared to move it forward to the council.
yeah, I don't want to, I want everyone to be able to look at it. The table of organization and the budget proposal, the city clerk and deputy clerk have an electronic format, and they will distribute those to the Board of E&A and anyone else who wants it, actually, so that you may look at the budget. It is searchable, like I said, so you could go through it and look at that, look at the proposal in detail. Okay?
Great.
Any other business?
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Second.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
You know, Mayor, we could.